This tour is very different from the normal ACO tour in that there's just a few members of the orchestra playing great pieces of chamber music. There are two pieces, neither of which we've played in subscription tours before, Schubert's Trout Quintet and Messiaen's Quartet for the End of Time. Schubert went at the age of 22, very young, into the countryside on a holiday, and there in the countryside he met an amateur cellist who was a sort of supporter of the arts as well, and the idea came about that he should write a piece of chamber music based on the Trout, the leader. It now has become one of the most loved pieces of chamber music, and it's just a really beautifully delightful piece from beginning to end. And it depicts the sounds and the air of the countryside, I think. I mean, obviously with the theme of the trout, it's, you know, bubbling brook and the trout darting in between the rocks. In stark contrast to the Schubert, the light, airy nature of the Schubert, the Messiaen Quartet for the End of Time was written under very, very different circumstances to the Schubert. It was written in 1940. He was in the French army and he was imprisoned in Germany. With Messiaen in the army, in the French army, was a cellist and a clarinetist. The clarinetist happened to have his instrument with him. And then the cellist, the story goes that he was in the kitchens and was able to save some food, and with the food sell the food and buy a cello, even though it only had 3 strings. Messiaen then discovered there was a violinist there, and of course Messiaen himself was the pianist. He considered himself not only a composer but an ornithologist as well. So there's lots of bird sound in his music, and the first movement depicts that amazingly well. The first instruction for the violin part is like a bird. This Messiaen's music really paints a picture. He uses very clear images. Of course, in this, The End of Time, he was a very religious man, and it's imagining the angel who announces the end of time with a rainbow on her head and surrounded by a cloud with 1 foot in the sea and 1 foot on the earth, declaring the end of time. So it's very deep, powerful, incredible music, and this is one of the most moving pieces I've ever played. It's one of an example of one of those pieces you come off totally, utterly exhausted from performing, and you really need a good 10-15 minutes of quiet and calm afterwards to recover from it. I heard a story when I was a student about a famous chamber music violinist in London and having a complete out-of-body experience, and it sounds a bit hippie and sort of weird, but I can imagine, because it's that kind of piece, that she saw herself, she sort of floated above the music and saw herself playing it down there, and it takes you into that kind of world. This piece premiered at the beginning of 1941 in the prisoner of war camp to the prisoners and the guards. Of course that performance would have been incredibly, incredibly powerful. And I've got a quote here that Messiaen said himself, "Never was I listened to with such rapt attention and comprehension." And I mean, you can imagine being in a prisoner of war camp and then hearing this incredible music and how powerful that must have been. It's quite an onerous task, isn't it, being a performer now and trying to perform a piece with the same kind of intensity.